Welcome into another edition of Sportball. It's your boy Sam. With me, as always, are my two, dare I say, the people I cherish the most in my life.
Oh,
Top 10. Kyle and Seth, how you
I'll
boys
take it.
doing?
I don't even take that as a compliment because top 10 to you means probably top 20. If you rank 20, your
Anytime
top 10
Sam makes
people,
the
you'd
top
include
10,
at least
it's-
20.
You're right. It's
It's
top
bullshit.
12. You're in the
Is what
honorable
this
mentions.
I'm honored as always.
Good. How we doing on this rainy Tuesday?
Hanging in there. I'm in the final stretch of my semester for grad school, so looking forward to being done.
While I sit here sipping on a papaya gummy vortex Northeast India Pale Ale from none other than Noon Whistle Brewing Company in Lombard, Illinois, our next sponsor of the podcast.
Whoa. They haven't paid us yet.
No free ads, you're right.
Easy.
No free ads. I'll edit it out.
I won't even say which beer I'm drinking, but
I'm just
rest
going to put a
assured
bleep sound. I'm going to beep while I'm talking about it.
Rest assured that my beer rhymes with who, Dune? Anyway, let's they didn't like that.
That's terrible.
That was the worst rhyme you could have done.
But it does rhyme.
You could have said
Oh man.
poo loon.
Yeah, that would have been better.
That would have made a lot more
All
sense.
right, you can edit that, right? But make it sound like I said it and that you laughed afterwards.
I got you. I'll work my magic now that I have a couple days off.
All right, so this is gonna be our big NBA offseason pod. A lot of stuff has gone
One of
down
many,
since
because we have
yeah.
a couple more weeks of the off season ends.
Right. But most of the dust is settled. You never know with the NBA. There's still a few dominoes left to fall, but we know a lot of it. Yeah, I think someone said like 90 to 95% of all spots on every team are filled. So
There's pretty much one big player we're waiting on still, maybe two.
yeah.
And they both originate from the great state of Texas.
Bogdanovich is from Texas?
Texas, Serbia. I don't know if you've heard of it. So I do want to start on a more somber note, though. On draft day, we learned that Klay Thompson went down with an injury during an offseason workout after he was ready, trying to get back from an ACL injury, which he suffered in the finals of 2019. And we have since learned that it is, in fact, an Achilles injury, which, as we know, is the worst injury for a basketball player to get, besides like
a beheading.
Livingston. Oh.
Yeah. So really bums me out. Goes without saying. I think everyone loves Klay. It wipes out a contender this year, maybe forever. I don't know. I don't want to speculate.
It doesn't wipe out a contender.
I don't see them as a championship contender without Klay, but maybe they'll prove me wrong.
I guess championship contender without Klay, probably. But
well, what did they think I meant by a contender?
Playoff contender.
Yeah, I still think they'll make the playoffs, but I know you guys are upset about it as well. The whole NBA community is. Seth, why don't you? I know you're just as upset as I am, maybe more. Why don't you give your funeral for Klay's Achilles?
Yeah, so as you all know, Klay is one of my favorite non-Celtic players in the league, and I'm constantly defending him and selecting him to my imaginary all-star teams. And even for me, as someone who just lived through 3 years of Gordon Hayward injuries, this injury news is, I think, the most depressing I've ever experienced, like sports injury news. I was just so excited to see him come back, to see the Warriors again. I predicted them to make it to the finals, and so excited to see them playing against the Lakers in the Western Conference. And now it's just all down the tubes. And, maybe a year from now or whenever the following season will start, like probably not even by the beginning of that season would Klay be ready to come back. And yeah, so it's just a tough blow. And I've honestly been like avoiding like media that talks about it because I just don't want to think about the injury. So sucks a lot, but he'll come back at some point. And
It really sucks.
You know.
It really does. I mean, I was just reading an interview with Steph today where he was saying he cried when he found out the news, and
Splash Brothers.
we were all emotional about it, honestly. And he's a beloved figure.
One of the first, I think, what's the word? Not advocate, but definitely hinted at smoking in the league. I feel like
Yeah,
he was one of the big weed guys. And I mean, I don't know if there's really many players in the league like Clay who just any night could go off for 50, 60 points on outrageous 3-point shooting, right? Maybe Harden, Steph, but then who else is just gonna? What was that game? Was it 2-3 years ago where I think he had like 17 total dribbles and scored
11 dribbles, 60 points. Yeah.
I don't think there's anyone else that could do that. Like I said,
in the history of the game. Yeah.
Besides Steph, maybe, but again,
yeah.
Steph always has the ball in his hand. So
right, he would be dribbling more than that. Yeah, and I think the reason why he's beloved in the NBA community is just the consummate teammate, right? You know, never needs the ball, never complains about touches or shooting, especially when Durant was on that team and he became the third option. Never complained from him. All of his teammates rave about him as the perfect guy to have in the locker room. So, I mean, Steph getting so emotional after hearing the news tells it all, right? I mean, this is a guy that's beloved, and we're really going to miss him this season. So,
there's so many great stories about Clay. I read years ago that he had just like before games, you could see him in the locker room just like crossing his legs, reading a newspaper.
Yeah.
And
glasses on in a robe, smoking a cigar, probably.
You gotta assume.
Yeah, someone saying it was maybe Kevin O'Connor was saying that the Warriors coaching staff like tried to encourage him, teach him to like draw fouls on 3-pointers and pump fake and like lean into a foul. He's just like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Love it.
That's not how basketball should be played. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. I mean, I've never heard anyone ever say anything bad about Clay.
No.
And to a T, everyone who's ever played with him says my favorite teammate is Clay.
He's the only Warrior that I don't think I've ever bad talked and ever will.
And that's rare for you.
It is rare for me. He's one of those guys. He's never really been a stogie boy, but he's been lingering back there. He's been trying to work his way in.
I mean, I think he's a squammy boy through and through, but
that's right.
It's not like he wouldn't be allowed to play pickup with just a stogie boy or a skull dog boy. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
certainly not.
Yeah. Let's transition to a player who definitely would be all right with hunting for fouls by going sideways into someone. James Harden. I was so mad. So, wild off season for the Houston Rockets. Obviously Daryl Morey left to go to the Sixers. Coach Mike D'Antoni left.
Fuck up number
doesn't
2.
Seem to be a lot of love for the owner for Tata Tillman. And with that, James Harden has requested a trade. Russell Westbrook then requested a trade.
But then James kind of recant once they were like possibly talking about dealing Westbrook, and he was like, I'm committed to the team now. Or is he just pulling one of these, I'm committed to the team once they trade him, then he takes out a page in the newspaper and it makes it seem like it was the ownership and not him?
I have no idea what's happening over there, but I do want to discuss all the possibilities because, this is one of the best players in the league. This would be huge if he moves. So, that's like one of the best players in the league. I don't know. So, so he did at first say that he wanted to be traded to the Nets and the Nets only of Brooklyn, which would be intriguing because he would be paired with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. There were also talks about maybe the 76ers would trade for him and have a more appetizing offer to the Rockets than anything the Nets could offer, because we think the Nets would probably do some combination of Karis LeVert, Allen, maybe Spencer Dinwiddie picks. But, as we know, the Sixers could offer either Embiid or Simmons which is better than any player the Nets could offer. So that's all on the table. One of the options is that
the Nets could offer Kevin Durant, but they just wouldn't.
One of the other scenarios is they just run it back, and everyone is just like, this is a little awkward, but here we go. So I want to talk about all the options here, but I do want to discuss the possibility of being traded to the Nets first, because that's certainly the most intriguing, I think, just for basketball entertainment. Kyle, do you see him as a good fit for the Nets, being a James Harden supporter? Is that where you'd want to see him go? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, the Nets would obviously, I think, be probably the second best team in the league with that big three. I know I've seen a lot of memes of, how it would just be three ball hogs, but, that wasn't the case when KD was in Golden State. He wasn't necessarily a ball hog. He doesn't have to always have the ball in his hand. James, he could play off ball. He doesn't need to have the ball in his hands. I see the smirk.
Well, I just think that
in theory he could. He just doesn't.
In theory, we'd have to see it.
Right. And I think a lot of people probably have that same sentiment, just because that was the offense that was built in Houston. It was built around James Harden being with the ball dominant guy. So that's all we've ever seen when James is on his own team. But I mean, he wasn't that player when he was in Oklahoma, when he was with Wes and Wes. Why did I just do that? Seth is really rubbing off on me.
Yeah, people.
I'm not the one who does that.
In our Discord, have been calling him Westbrook, have been calling him Wes or WB, like the Warner Brothers. I don't understand what's going on.
Or Brooke.
So I mean, Harden obviously is, from those days, is a much more matured player. He's improved his game in all facets, in my opinion. Obviously, I think that because I'm the biggest Harden fan on the planet. But I think you put three of the best offensive players together. Maybe they don't have a great defense, but again, they could outscore any team in the league. So do you really need to have a top 5 defense when you have three of the best offensive players in the league? I don't think so.
Yeah, I would have a
That's
couple
why I
qualms.
think it would work.
I have a couple qualms with the defense being one of them. I mean, of course, these are 3 great players, right? And we've seen big threes come together and make it work, most notably in the recent past, LeBron, Wade, and Bosh. My question would kind of be like, who plays the Bosh role and sacrifices so much for this team, right? Because these are, if they were to come together, would be the 3 highest usage players to play on the same team in the history of the league. So
I'm not going to lie to you. I think it ends up being KD.
It would have to be, because these other 2 players, Kyrie and James, need the ball in their hands to play. So, KD can play that complementary role. The problem is he's the best player out of those 3. So it's kind of like, is that really what you want? And I mean, like you said, we saw him play a little off ball in Golden State. But that was kind of like their second player was Clay, who doesn't need the ball either. So it would definitely be tricky. I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it, because it's kind of like a fantasy team that you're putting together. Like, looks good on paper. I think defensively there'd be some issues with that backcourt.
But I feel like a lot of people thought the same thing about when the first big 3 was formed, right? With Wade and LeBron and Bosh in Miami. There was a lot of questions on how that was going to work, right? And there's a lot of questions about, maybe not as many questions, but when the big 3 in Golden State also, right, with how ball dominant we thought Curry was, and how, like you said, how ball dominant of a forward KD is. But teams, when you have players of that caliber, they make it work. And it's not like they'd be playing 48 minutes together. They're going to play the first 6 minutes of the game together. They'll stagger the rest of the half until probably the last 3 minutes. And then the same thing in the second half. They'll open together, and then they'll just stagger until the final 4 or 5 minutes of the fourth quarter.
So that looks like you wanted to input. What were you going to say?
Yeah, several things. I think the upside is undeniable. Imagining that lineup, like, if everything were to click, it would obviously be devastating and very difficult to guard. I think there's also significant downside. And there's little evidence from what we've seen of those three players so far that they would be able to mesh well together. Not saying it's impossible. We saw Harden play a third banana role early in his career in OKC, right? So if they went that route and said okay, Kyrie is going to be the Westbrook role, and it'll be OKC with Harden kind of being in that role. He was a sixth man. I don't think he's going to be cool with being a sixth man again. I also know, just by nature of these three players and their personalities, one day they could be best friends, and 2 days later Kyrie requests a trade because KD said something the wrong way or whatever.
That's a great point, Seth. That's a huge part of this.
Personalities where Kyrie's never happy for more than a year at a time, and they all want their own teams. It feels like, right? Kyrie, the whole thing we saw with Cleveland was that Kyrie wanted to leave because he didn't have his home team, and then he got his own team in Boston, and then he didn't want to be a leader, and then it's so who knows what's going to happen. I also think if I were the Nets, I would tell the Rockets, I'll give you Kyrie Irving for James Harden.
Yeah, I would like that a lot more, honestly.
That way you can keep some of your future assets. You can keep Karis LeVert, who in that case, he's still a talented scorer, a talented player, but of a kind of volatile risk personality who demands a lot of media attention, potential problem in the locker room. And he can kind of be that third player who can score when the other two are on the bench, or can just kind of facilitate the offense, play make. I don't think the Nets would do that, but that's what I would do if I were them. And I think Harden and Durant, just having that big two with more supporting players around them, makes more sense to me than trying to go all in on the big three with those personalities and scrubs around that.
Kyle, you looked like you were going to say something. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to talk about the Kyrie personality thing and his comments, whenever they were a year or two ago, of wanting his own team. I think a lot of people took that in the sense of he wanted to be the man and the number one on a team. But I think that more so was he wanted to have that same, playing with LeBron, the ability to have input and have say into team decisions. I think that's what Kyrie more so meant, is he wanted his team. And I feel like with the friendship that he has with KD, that kind of empowers him more in the sense that he will actually have a say in personnel decisions. Not as big as Durant's say, obviously, or not as big as
Harden.
No, not Harden.
Nash.
Why can't I think? Yeah, Steve Nash. Jesus Christ.
That's we haven't even talked about that. The fact that poor Steve Nash, first year on the job, might have to deal with this.
But I think that's more in line in what Kyrie was referring to when he said he wanted his own team. And I think that's kind of what he has now, like I said, with Durant, and someone that will allow him to have a voice in what he thinks. Because you talk to everyone, or not talk to, but we've hear other players say how Kyrie's understanding of the game is one of the best in the leagues, right? And we've heard that from multiple different players. And just to say that, he doesn't have a say in the players that he's surrounded by, I think that's kind of been his biggest turnoff from the teams that he's been on.
That's a good point, because we know LeBron can suffocate a team, and everything revolves around LeBron, and it's not
greatest player of all time. I mean, you have to,
of course, and that's not true to the same extent with Kevin Durant. But I think the personalities are a big look on paper. Like you said, second best team in the league, maybe first, honestly, right? And I think personalities matter a lot, though. Like I'm not coming at the character of any of these guys, and of course, who am I to say? But I mean, these guys are great in their community, great people, etc. But both Kyrie and Durant are people that have huge mood swings, and they come in. This is not. I'm not the first one to say this. This is people in the buildings that they're in that have discussed this, and it's like these are great guys, but like you don't know what you're getting day to day, right? And I think on the Warriors that was fine because you have Steph and Clay, who Clay we just talked about, one of the best teammates that you could possibly have. Steph is steady as a rock. If there's no steady presence there and you have three superstars, maybe Harden's a steady presence, but he hasn't always been. We've seen superstar after superstar have trouble playing with him. So I feel like with Kyrie and Durant being the people that they are, again, not trying to say anything bad about them. They're great people, but just the way that they change their mind a lot, and they can be prone to being in different moods, depending on the day. And I just don't know what the rock holding that team together would be. So although it looks like Seth said, the ceiling is so high, I think an implosion, could be something that ends of really what their ceiling could be.
What superstars have had trouble playing with Harden?
Well, I'm just saying each of his marriages end, a little like Chris Paul, Dwight Howard,
Was
who
injured.
Obviously I'm not going to defend Dwight Howard in that scenario, but Dwight Howard, Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, those three have had short stints with him and haven't loved playing with him, it seems. So
I don't think we've heard any of them say that they didn't enjoy playing with Harden.
Well, I think Harden basically said either CP3 is gone or I am when he was gone. So, and I guess we're not sure about Westbrook, but
right, yeah. And I guess the Chris Paul thing was more of we saw him get injured, and who would have known that once they traded him to OKC that he was going to return to the same Chris Paul that we've essentially saw 4 years ago? Not even
and Chris Paul has an abrasive personality. I shouldn't be that hard on Harden. I'm just saying that it's not like Harden has been talked about like Steph or Clay. That's all.
That's fair.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add in from an X's and O's perspective. When you look at the big threes throughout history, right? We talked about the Heat, and you had one person who stepped out, who backed away with Bosh, right? And he was someone who, when he doesn't have the ball, he can be in the dunker spot, he can post up and call for the ball, or he can fade out and hit jumpers, right? So he can draw the other big man away from the basket, leading to driving lanes, right, for LeBron or Wade. Same thing with the big three in Boston. Garnett was the one who sacrificed the most with that big three. You saw him being like, completely running the offense in Minnesota. And then he was another one who could step out 12 feet from the basket and hit jumpers and pull the big man away. On the Warriors, you had Steph and Clay being two of the best off-ball players in the game, where as soon as Steph passes the ball away, he's off to the races, running around, and his defender has to chase him the whole time and going around screens, running under the basket and popping out in the other corner, and they pass to him, right? And so the question for me is, are Harden and Kyrie willing to put in that kind of work off the ball, where they're running around screens, they're making backdoor cuts? Because what we've seen them do, again, different type of offense, structured differently. So can they adapt? What we've seen them do in the last few years is they pass the ball and they stand at the 3-point line and watch what happens in the play. And maybe they get the ball back to them and then they do something. I mean, I saw that Kyrie in Boston. It was he's standing while passing the ball, and he dusty dribbles and shoots, right? Or dishes it out to somebody. And Harden, people have been saying that forever. It's like he's just standing 30 feet from the basket watching if he's not shooting himself. So obviously those are things that they're physically capable of. and maybe somebody like Nash and D'Antoni as an assistant can develop the offense where they're motivated and willing to do that, but we just haven't seen it yet. So I wouldn't bet on it happening. Also, we've been talking for 20 minutes about it as if Harden's already on the Nets, so that might not even happen. So
yeah, right. So I did want to also, before we get off this topic, because like you said, we don't know if it's going to happen. I think there's a healthy discussion to be had on just how the NBA is today, right? Where we see a lot of players only on each team for 1 to 2 years, a lot of superstars wanting to pair up and making it happen. And, I'm obviously not against player empowerment at all. This is called the player empowerment era. And rightfully so, these players should be taking some power back from the owners, because a lot of people have been talking about the example of Ricky Rubio, right? Like he just got shipped off to Minnesota again last week, and that wasn't obviously his choice to go from sunny Phoenix back to the cold trenches of Minnesota. So these players don't have a choice when they're traded. So obviously they need to take some power back in their own hands. I feel like this is a situation where I'm a little queasy about it, just because it just feels like the Rockets built around Harden and how he wanted to play. And like we said, Dwight Howard, Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook all got to play with him, all came into play with him. And then, and then he says, "Oh, I'm out. I want to be traded." Admittedly, I wouldn't like playing for that owner either, from what I've heard. And his GM, Daryl, was gone. But it's just, and on top of it, he demanded one team, which of course puts the team that's trading him in a bind when he says he only wants to, sign with one team. So that's on the precipice of where I get a little, queasy about where this is going. And just from a fan perspective, it sucks, man. It does, because maybe some people like it. I guess a lot of people are fans of just players, and they root for them anywhere they go. But when everyone switches teams
like
every 1 to 2 years, there's not a lot of exactly. There's not a lot of continued through lines that you can draw. Like Seth, you grew up being a fan of Paul Pierce and the Celtics for 20 years. That's not really happening anymore. And I'm at a little loss of if I like the direction where it's going. I don't know. Maybe Seth, maybe you can put it in more concise terms than that.
Okay, so a couple things. I'll try to go quickly through several thoughts. One is just me being petty, because Bill Simmons on his Book of Basketball podcast said that Julius Erving started the player empowerment era, which is so dumb, because
Bill Simmons is dumb.
An era is talking about a period of time where ideology is present, right? So just because one player negotiated their contract and back against ownership in the past, that doesn't mean that was the start of the era. If we're talking about the civil rights era, it's like looking at the 60s as dominated by this trajectory of work towards social justice and ending segregation, right? That doesn't mean that no one ever before that had tried to work against segregation in the United States. It's not like the first person who thought of that idea started the era.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways,
Kyle, you can just cut that.
Yeah, you can cut all that. So what you were saying about I think it's a little bit overblown that we any teams where the star sticks with their team anymore. I think we do. That's just fewer. We've got Dame on the Blazers. We got Steph on the Warriors. We'll see what happens with all these rookie contracts with, Tatum and Mitchell and Bam, right?
De'Aaron Fox.
But, right. So I will agree with you, Sam, about this case in Harden. I think all of us are in general very pro player. But if you look at this, it's like, okay, you're frustrated. You've lost in the playoffs a bunch of times. One of them, unlucky injury, Chris Paul, but you didn't really get along with him. So you told him to, you told the team to get rid of him and get Westbrook instead. Westbrook's ass. So you lost again. But more to the point, you lost again because just like every year in the playoffs, James Harden didn't play well and was inefficient from the field and didn't show up in the biggest moments. So really it's on him more than anybody else, especially when the entire offense is structured around you. So it's like you have the team, build the whole team around you, the entire structure of the offense focused around what you can do. Then you don't have as much success as you want. And with 2 years left in your contract, you're like, get me out of here, when they've catered to your every whim for 4 years.
But at the
I
same
think,
time, they
honestly,
did get rid of, his coach and GM. So
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't want to play for that owner either. So I see that side of it for sure.
right. And I think, to be fair, a similar critique could be made about Giannis, where we don't know as much about the inside and what he's been saying to ownership and everything, but it feels like they underachieved in the playoffs last year, and then Giannis is like, get me Drew Holiday, and then the team overpays for Drew Holiday. I don't know if that's exactly what happened, but it's like, okay, you underachieved in the playoffs last year because of you.
Yeah.
Like, Giannis, if you had just played better, then you would have won. So I think doing this whole thing about like, well, we need a better supporting cast or I'm not going to sign the contract is kind of bullshit. Again, I don't really know if that's what happened with Giannis. That's just kind of what it seems like from the outside.
Sure.
I'm not connected enough to have sources who could tell me, but I think that was a overpay for Drew Holiday,
which we'll get to.
Although at other times I feel like it's not, because first round picks are worthless. But yeah, I think, so yeah, go ahead.
I think that point is solid. And Kyle, why don't you give your last thought on this player empowerment segment before we move on?
So I guess my thought to everything that Seth said was, at least there's got to be at some point, right? Like we say, they didn't achieve well in the playoffs, so now players doing whatever they can to get out of their situation, go to a better situation. It makes sense. I mean, there's only a handful of players probably we've seen in the NBA that can by themselves will a team to a series win. It's like right. LeBron, it's Jordan, Bill, right? The greatest of all times.
Yeah.
And not every superstar that we talk about are going to be in that greatest player of all time discussion that could do that. So I guess my thought is at some point, obviously these players are going to want help, and maybe a change of scenery works. Maybe a change in role or a change in supporting cast works. And maybe, taking some of the heat off what Harden's had the last however many years he's been in Houston, and not necessarily being viewed as the alpha 1A on a team helps him. And I want to see him win a championship. And like we said, the net spot is obviously going to be the best opportunity in his career to do that. So
it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that situation plays out and kind of how that goes in the future. I want to quickly hit draft reaction because we haven't recorded since the NBA draft happened. So LaMelo Ball went to the Hornets, where his father will play Jordan one-on-one in the televised event of the century.
To determine who becomes the rightful owner of the team.
Yeah. Anthony Edwards, a.k.a. Andrew Wiggins, Part 2, went to his rightful home in Minnesota.
I don't think it was mentioned enough that like a day or two before the draft, there was an interview where he said he doesn't really love basketball, and if he was drafted to play football, he would turn basketball down for the rest of his life and play football.
That interview was insane. He was like, you can do so many things in football. You can spike the ball, you can dance and celebrate. It's like football barely lets you celebrate at all. The NBA, you're way more visible and you can do like anything you want. LeBron literally flipped a bottle onto the court and it was televised. Like you can do whatever you want. I don't understand at all. So that was very worrisome to me. But yeah, so that happened. Wiseman went to the Warriors to try to continue their dynasty with a new big man. Our boy Halliburton fell all the way to the Kings.
Crazy. I can't believe he fell that far.
Yeah. So Kyle, why don't you start us off going to where you want? What are your reactions to the draft?
Obviously going to start it off with the Bulls. right, with the 4th pick. I mean, a lot of mocks, right, had Halliburton going to them, and comes their pick and they take an absolute flyer on Williams, Patrick Williams, a 1-year player from Florida State that didn't even start. It's questionable. Obviously over the last, month and a half, when all these teams were doing their interviews and workouts and everything, he started flying up the boards more and more and more. And even I was listening to Russillo and O'Connor talk about it, and O'Connor didn't think either that Williams, when he started preparing for the draft, that he was going to be anywhere in the top half of the first round. So obviously there's got to be something to that. And I think we saw his athletic ability at Florida State. He is a crazy athlete, but when you're picking in the top 5 of a draft, obviously I'm all for drafting for upside, but when you have one of those first 5 picks, you really should focus and prioritize taking a player that will have an immediate impact on your team, right? You were one of the worst teams in the league. Take a player that's going to be able to come in day one and make an impact. And I don't think Patrick Williams, he could prove us wrong, obviously, but I don't think that he's that guy. We didn't see it last year.
Yeah.
The 1 year he played in college. What makes us confident or think that just because he had good workouts and because he's a really good athlete means he's going to become one of the, next best players from this rookie draft class, when 2 months ago he was projected to go in the late 20s. It's
yeah, it's one of those picks where I feel like they draft him for his body. Wow,
right.
6'8", perfect body for the NBA, and he's showing flashes of skills. And I'm just kind of does he have any skills? Can you name the skills that he has that translate to the NBA? So I'll be interested to see how that plays out. I didn't love the pick at all, but
I drafted Russell Wilson for his body into my bedroom.
The one thing
that
though
worked
that
out for you.
I don't want to completely trash this pick off the bat, because finally this is our first draft in how many years with what should be a good coach and new front office.
Yeah.
I want to trust them because they've shown in their previous positions that they know what they're doing, which we never saw from anyone in the Bulls organization for the last 15 years. So
certainly not.
I don't want to trash it too much. I question it though, right?
Yeah. Seth, what about you? You want to talk about your Celtics picks?
Well, it's going to shock all of our listeners, but I actually have not seen Aaron Nesmith play. I don't even know if that's how you pronounce his name.
Smith.
I think it's
so
Naismith.
Kyle, you said that he's pretty good. So seems good to me.
He might be, like I told you as soon as that pick happened, honestly, the best pure shooter in the class in this freshman class. So
I like shooting.
Exactly.
That sounds like a skill that could translate to the NBA, unlike none of the skills that Patrick Williams has. So
I think he's the kind of player, especially at that pick, you pick him due to obviously the upside he has, but the proven ability of him being able to score. And that's kind of what you're looking for to bolster your bench going into the season when you already have a solidified roster. That's just like a home run type pick, as long as nothing crazy happens, right?
Yeah. Any other reactions to some of the picks? I mean, I think we all think that Halliburton's a steal for the Kings. I kind of heard that maybe one of the reasons he fell is that he wanted to go to the Kings and his agent didn't let him work out for other teams. So that could be part of it. But it was still surprising to see him drop all the way to 12. LaMelo on the Hornets should be interesting, I think. Just given the reign of the team, see what happens there.
That team is going to be so weird to watch. You have LaMelo, who's going to need a 30% usage rate. You have Devontae Graham, who was at like 30-something% himself last year. And now they just signed Gordon Hayward to this outrageous deal.
Spoilers for our free agency segment.
He's anything like he was in the past. He's going to, after getting paid that much, right, at least command upper 20s in usage. So who the hell else is going to touch the ball on that team?
We might as well just use this to transition to free agency, because that was maybe the most shocking move, at least money-wise, for free agency. Gordon Hayward opted out of his deal with the Celtics, where he was going to get around $34 million. And I think we were all like, why would he do that? Like, he's not going to get that money elsewhere. Well, we were wrong, because he got 4 years, $120 million with the Hornets. And there was rumors that he was going to go to the Pacers and it was going to be a sign and trade for Miles Turner. And that didn't end up happening. Seems like because Boston didn't want Miles Turner, Seth, which is interesting to me. But
Well,
it sucks that you guys lost.
Figured they'd get Tristan.
Right. And it sucks that you guys lost Gordon for nothing, certainly. And it's interesting that the Hornets chose to give him that much money when he has this injury history and he only has one All-Star appearance.
I feel like it's really just history from a year ago repeating itself, right? So the Celtics signed Al Horford, 5 years ago. He played 3 years and he had a player option for $30 million in his fourth year. And he didn't pick it up. And everyone was kind of like, wow, that's a lot of money to not pick up on. He must have something else, And then he had this giant contract with the Sixers. And the same exact thing happened with Hayward. The Celtics signed him a year after they signed Horford. And then he had $30 million player option, didn't pick it up. We're like, what? And then he gets 4 years, $120 million in Charlotte. And you saw what happened to Al. So, I mean, I wish him well. Gordon obviously had really bad luck in the Celtics, with the Celtics and all those injuries. And I hope he's able to stay healthy. But I certainly don't think he's worth that money at this point in his career. And the fact that he basically got the same contract as he did coming out of Utah makes no sense, because all he's shown in the last 3 years is that he was injured.
So the one interesting
and then
thing,
I think the Celtics kind of using some of that money, whatever money they could, to take Thompson is going to be good for us. I felt a little bit underwhelmed at first, but he kind of has warmed up to me. And I think having a bigger guy to play defense, has veteran experience to guard some of those big men in the East, and also someone who, at least in the past, shown that he could guard smaller players on switches is key. So those are the two biggest things for me, in addition to rim running and catching lobs and stuff. So.
Yeah, and what I was going to say in regards to Hayward is, I guess before he went to the Celtics, that Jordan tried to recruit him to Charlotte in the first place. So Jordan really has a thing for Gordon Hayward. So I guess it was inevitable that if he became available, it was that was gonna be where he ends up. But
I can kind of see the thinking with the Hornets. It's like, well, no one's gonna come to Charlotte unless we overpay them, right? So we have to give him more money. We're going to have tons of cap space next year. We're not going to get Giannis or whoever else is in the market. So we're probably just going to pay it for a bunch of shitty players like we did with Bismack Biyombo.
At what point do you stop perpetually overpaying and tanking at the same time? I don't get organizations like that.
The other thing is they could bite the bullet and completely be out of the race for the A seed in the East and get some high draft picks. But I can understand, I think I've said that on this pod before. It's when you're a small market team like that and you're just trying to make money, you don't just print money like the Lakers. You're not guaranteed to have fans in the stands. Well, no one is this year, but in the normal times, it's can we stomach a 5-year rebuild when we are a small market team like this? I think that is definitely a question you have to ask yourself. I mean, Sam Presti doesn't seem to think about it twice, but but I can see the thinking. I mean, I wouldn't have done it, and I still think it's pretty dumb, but I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate, I guess,
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if we really need to spend much more time on Charlotte. They're not going anywhere. They're going to end 10th, 11th
Well, here was what I really want to talk about is how the Lakers got better over this offseason. And I don't want to hear any
Outrageous, dude.
talk from Kyle about a three-peat again, because we know that he has stabbed me, the LeBron, and the Lakers in the back several times. But
I can't root for LeBron when he's playing against my favorite player.
correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong in any of these free agency things, because a million people moved a million places, so I might get this wrong. But so they lost Rondo, Avery Bradley, JaVale, Dwight Howard. Coming in, they got Montrezl Harrell,
And Danny
which
Green,
at
they lost
first
Danny Green, too.
I told you guys. Sorry, I lost Danny Green too. You're right. At first when Montrez came in, I told you guys I don't know if I'd love the fit, because he's not a shooter and he's pretty small. Can they get a bigger Howard type? And then they went inside Marc Gasol, which kind of basically clears up all those issues for me. So I like that fit of those two a lot as their big man. You take a washed Marc Gasol, he's old, but him and Montrez are still an upgrade over Howard and JaVale at this point in their careers. So
Big upgrade.
yeah. Yeah. And they also got Dennis Schroeder, Kyle's boy, who, is obviously an upgrade over Rondo, right? Season. At this point in his career, and Kyle, I know you love it. Just tell me how much you love these moves in the offseason.
Really, everything I could have dreamed of, seeing my guy, Dennis Schroeder, go to a championship contender. This is all he's needed. He's had a shot. He's proven himself, getting paid for it. And now he's going to, what was he? Second in 6-man voting last year. Should have been first. Fuck Montrez for that. But he's going to win 6-man of the year this year.
It's funny that the two front runners for 6-man of the year ended up on the same team this year. And it's also funny that Montrez just walked across
the locker rooms.
The locker room, yeah. Walked across the other locker room in Staples Center. I think they're the favorites to repeat, which, probably would have been pretty true this year, despite anything that they did if they didn't implode too much. So
the one thing I wonder when that Montrez to the Lakers signing happened, and then after seeing the Clippers outrageously overpay Markieff. Is it Markieff or Marcus? Which twin is it? They both suck, so it doesn't matter. To see them do that, I wonder, did that one incident in that playoff game against Dallas where we finally saw afterwards the Clippers kind of implode some, where he got into that huge argument with Pandemic P, Paul George, did that play into their I don't know if it's unwillingness, but them not signing him because they knew Paul was going to stay there? Obviously, I don't know if we're going to know, but when I first saw that and then saw them pay Marcus Morris more money than what Montrez was getting, that was the first thing that came to my mind was,
the other thing is
confrontation and then collapse in the playoffs essentially due to that was the reason he's not back with the Clippers.
I think the reason he's not back with the Clippers is because he was the worst player that they were playing minutes in the playoffs.
He also wasn't fully healthy, but
yeah, and that was a big thing too. He had to leave the bubble for a family emergency. Maybe all that wouldn't have happened if it was a regular season, but he was unplayable in the playoffs, and that's one of the big reasons Doc Rivers got fired, because he still rode him even though he's getting destroyed by Jokic. And we can use this to pivot to the Clippers. What's funny, you brought up Marcus Morris's contract. I saw this. So Marcus Morris signed for $64 million, right? His twin Markieff signed for the minimum with the Lakers, but they confirmed that they put all their contracts into a joint bank account. So why do they care which one of them gets the big contract? It's still both their money. So, so I thought that was really funny.
Collusion, you think?
Yeah, but
the collusion's the right word.
They also added.
Well, it's benefiting the Lakers because they're able to spend less money on Markieff because
Markieff wasn't getting paid anywhere, so I don't think it mattered.
Yeah, I don't think it really mattered that much. It's just a funny wrinkle. But the Clippers also added Serge Ibaka, which I love for them, and Luke Kennard, kind of to replace that shooter and Shamet that they lost. Seth, what do you think about the Clippers offseason? Do you still see them as the second best team in the West?
I do love Serge. I think that's if he plays as well as he did with Toronto last year, that's a big upgrade over Montrez, in my opinion.
Having any type of center that could shoot is huge for them because that's the one thing the Clippers didn't have at all last year.
Yeah, I know in that Toronto series with the Celtics in the playoffs, he was the person I was worried about the most. And I think if Toronto had used him more, they would have beaten us. So I like that for them. I'm sad to see Shamet go, but I kind of like Luke Kennard, see what he can do when he gets out of the horrible place of Detroit. Not
I
just
also have to
city,
wonder
but the team.
with Kennard, are his knees intact at all?
Mm-hmm.
I heard he's the bee's knees, actually.
But these knees ain't look like no bees, you know what I mean?
I think they'll still be good.
Yeah.
And they certainly have the upside, but similar to how we talked with the Nets and based on what we saw last year in the playoffs, I don't know. My confidence in them is shaken, and it'll depend on if Paul George can get his act together and if they can mesh as a team. So
the other team,
they don't have any depth. That's the one worry I have about the Clippers.
Mm-hmm.
Is after once you start going to the bench, who is it? Who's their sixth man now? Is it what?
Pat?
That's what I was gonna say. Is Pat or Luke Kennard's your sixth man, and then I guess Lou Williams is your sixth man. Fine, but then seventh and eighth, it's Luke Kennard, Pat,
I don't think
Terrence
that,
Mann.
honestly. I mean, well, I don't even know if Serge is going to start. I mean, Zubac might still start.
Yeah.
So if your 8-man rotation is Zubac, George, Kawhi, Pat Bev, Kennard, Serge, and Pat, and Lou, I guess that was 9. Like, I still don't mind that in the playoffs.
I just don't think it's that good, especially for the Western Conference, but that's all right.
The one other team I did definitely want to discuss from the West is the Suns, because they got Chris Paul in a trade from OKC. Also added Jay Crowder, which I think will be nice for them. What do you think, Kyle? What do you think of Chris Paul for them?
Obviously, I think Chris Paul is a huge get. Really just for the experience. Right, like it's not like Ricky Rubio was a bad option at all last year. He had a really great year. But obviously Chris Paul is one of the best point guards to play in the league essentially ever, right? And then to pair him with a young Devin Booker, who is one of those players that like any night could go for 40, 50 points when he's feeling it. I like the Chris Paul get, but you also lost Oubre, who played really well for you last year. And didn't, I'm trying to pull up who do they have, right? That's going to replace him, unless you feel that great about Mikal Bridges.
Yeah, I think their starting lineup in the bubble when they went 8-0 didn't even have Oubre in it.
He was also injured, but
right, they didn't even have Oubre in the bubble when they went 8-0, so I don't see that as a huge loss for them. I mean, they have Mikal Bridges and that kid that they drafted at the 4, starting at the 4, that shooter Cam Johnson. So I think you run that back as your starting lineup.
Yeah, and I love the Jay Crowder get too. Like we saw last year in Miami, obviously the 3-and-D player that he is. I think that's huge for them.
Yeah, Cam Johnson's a great shooter, but
Oubre, in my opinion.
Yeah, and Cam Johnson's a great shooter, but you need that bigger guy who can guard forwards, which Jay is. So I think they can be pretty versatile on that end. Seth, do you like the Suns this year?
Yeah, I'll be quick because I know we're running out of time, but I like Chris. I've always loved Devin Booker, and I think Ayton is underrated and maybe not as flashy and obviously not as good as
he's
Luka.
He's another one of those like traditional centers though, which just doesn't tickle my fancy.
It does not. But I think he'll play a good role for them, and yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing them in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I think they're one of the teams that make the playoffs in the West though.
Agreed. Quickly before we move to the East, I did want to mention Portland got better this year, I think.
a lot
We don't have to do much analysis on it, but not having to play Hassan looks like they're not going to bring him back. They got Cantor and Giles as their big
Got
men.
rid of Hazonia.
Got rid of the scourge of Mario Hazonia, brought in Robert Covington, Kyle's favorite player in the league, and some might call him
greatest
in
basketball
Kyle's
player to ever
estimation,
live.
one of the top 50 NBA players of all time.
That's a goddamn fact.
And they re-signed Hood coming off that injury and Melo. I think this is a deep team ready for another playoff run.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know if, me being the biggest Bobby Covington fan in the world, I really think that is like maybe an under the radar signing that really puts him over the top. Like he's just his defensive versatility and his shot making abilities. Like I likened it in our group chat to imagine if Carmelo Anthony had any type of basketball IQ and could defend a school child on a court, right? That's exactly.
That's gonna get mad. You're making Seth mad because he peed in Carmelo's urinal one time.
I mean, I think it's a little unfair to say he doesn't have basketball IQ. He's just bad at defense because he's old.
He just sucks. He's always sucked.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless he's playing internationally. Who cares?
The fact that you say Carmelo Anthony sucks and Robert Covington is a top 50 player all time is just outlandish.
To be fair, I said that, but I know he actually thinks he's a top 30 all time. So
Kyle said it's a goddamn fact after you said that.
Okay, let's hit the East real quick because I think we're almost at an hour. The Bucks must be discussed. We hinted at it, but they gave up the mother load for Drew Holiday.
Is it really the mother load?
Like we mentioned, so it was 3 first rounds and 2 pick swaps, which I think is absurd for Drew Holiday. Now, let's put in the caveat that if they knew this was going to get Giannis to re-sign with him, and all signs are pointing to Giannis re-signing, then maybe we think it's worth it, especially since those picks won't be great picks, right, guys? And, what is a first-round pick really worth these days if you can't, the return on late first-round picks isn't great. So all that being said, I still think it was an overpay. But it does make their team better next year. You can't argue with that. And having Drew as that solid point guard that they never got with Bledsoe in the playoffs, right? We know he was horrendous in the playoffs. Definitely bolsters their lineup. Like we said earlier, Giannis wasn't really the supporting cast wasn't really the problem with the playoffs. It was Giannis. So we'll see what that happens. But another regular season juggernaut season for the Bucks, right, Seth?
Yeah. Did those first round picks have protections on them?
No.
I never saw that. They're all unprotected, right?
No, but it didn't.
Yeah, that's
as long as Giannis signs that max,
right,
and that Drew resigns, that's going to be a late 20s first round pick for the next 3 years.
Right. But wasn't one of the picks in like 2027?
Yeah, one of them is really far out. So, maybe
it's like next year, the 20 or 23, and then like 25 or 26.
That's
maybe Giannis is the next Dirk and he stays here for 20 years, or maybe he's, James Harden wants out in a few years. So that could benefit it. But regardless, Drew Holiday's a good player.
Basically, we all like Drew. We think the Bucks will be better, but it's also a question of, okay, they lost some depth now. Will Bud be willing to play his players for 40 minutes in the playoffs?
I hope
because if they're going back to 36 minutes a game for Giannis, Drew, and Middleton and throwing their scrubs in there off the bench, it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah. Kyle, quick thoughts on the Bucks?
Yeah. So, love this move that they made. I think Drew is one of the best, obviously, two-way guards in the league, more so on the defensive end, but either way, he still gets his on the offensive end. So I think he's a really good complement to Giannis being the primary ball handler. And I think their small ball lineup is going to be one of the best small ball lineups in the league, right? With Drew, Dante, Middleton, Giannis playing the 5, and then whoever they end up getting to play the 4. But the one thing I really want to talk about is, we just talked about the small market teams in relation to Charlotte and, tanking and all this stuff. Like, when you have, right, an opportunity to win a championship, when you're a team as good as what we saw the Bucks were and we expect them to be now, I think you have to go all in on that. That's just one of the ways that I view the NBA is there's typically just a really small window that you have to win a championship. So what you have to do, mortgage the future for it if you have to really increase your chances now, which I think is something that they did. And being the small market team, who cares? Like if it doesn't work and it flops, you're still a small market team, right? It doesn't, if your team's bad, your team's bad. If Giannis leaves, but at least you gave yourself at the time the best opportunity to win a championship that you could have. And if giving 3 late 20s, first round picks, Eric Bledsoe and George Hill for a player that we presumably believe will lead to Giannis signing a supermax deal, that's a play that you have to make.
Yeah, agreed. Let's hit the Hawks real quick. I want to discuss them. They're making a real push for the 8th seed, the coveted 8th seed in the East. Bringing in Gallinari and Bogdan Bogdanovic, who we should mention nearly signed with the Bucks, and we all thought he did for a few days until it turns out he didn't. And now the Kings have a few more hours, I think, Kyle.
3 hours from where we're talking.
I don't see them matching it. I think he goes to the Hawks. They also added Rondo and Chris Dunn to kind of bolster the defense of their guards. Kyle, what do you think about what the Hawks did over the offseason?
I don't know what to expect from this team now. Like, you're already playing Trey 38 minutes a game. So why are you going to sign Chris Dunn and Rajon Rondo? Like, I just don't see them as, I guess Dunn is an okay fit maybe next to Trey, but Trey and Rondo don't really make sense to me. And then you still have, right now you got Gallinari and then John Collins and Clint Capella. And then you drafted another center after you just drafted a center the year before. I just don't really know the identity of this team at all. And I don't really know what to expect. Like, I don't know the type of basketball that they're going to play. So it's tough for me to say that I could see them making the playoffs because I don't know what's going to happen.
It kind of reminds me of the Blazers team from last year, but worse because they have like all guards and big men. And what the Blazers were really missing, which is why we're so excited about Robert Covington, is that wing player who can play defense, hit threes, guard bigger guys. And it's like you've got this shoot first point guard in Trae Young, who's obviously not as good as Lillard. And then you added some more guards to try to be complementary to him, maybe to try to like make up for some of his poor defense as a guard. And then all your other players are big men. And yeah, I'm not really a Hawks fan, I guess. And yeah, like Bogdan's pretty small too. So I don't think he really fits the bill as that wing.
I guess eventually they want DeAndre and Cam to be those wings, right? But I mean, they're so young and who's to say, right?
Like, I feel like this Hawks team has like 30 players on it.
Yeah, and they're all like decent, but not that great. And they all have flaws. Yeah. Let's really quick hit a little segment Kyle wanted us to do, which was our kind of surprise success teams that we think we're going to see this season and kind of our surprise implosion teams that we're going to see.
Yeah, one.
Let's just do one.
One for. Yeah, exactly. One of each from the whole league. I was going to do one from each conference.
We're short on time. So Kyle, why don't you go first? You can name all 4 of yours if you want, Kyle.
Okay, good. Eastern Conference. My one surprise team, and I don't know how much of a surprise it might be, but Washington Wizards.
I was going to say
that's a surprise.
So I definitely think they make the playoffs this year. I just don't know how high of a seed they get, but just high on them bringing back. Why can't I think of his name?
John Wall?
No.
I
just had
Bertans.
Yes, Bertans. Thank you.
I know you.
It's exactly what I was trying to say. It was on the tip of my tongue until Seth said another name. And And then John Wall coming back, who knows what he's going to be, but we saw what Bradley Beal could do. So that is my team to watch for in the East. The team that I think, I guess the biggest surprise non-good team, I don't know the right word, implosion team, I guess is what we're saying, probably the Pacers. After being the 4th seed last year, they didn't really do anything to improve. And, the stories of Oladipo supposedly asking multiple players from other teams if he could join their team during games just doesn't sit well with me.
I don't see them being a 4th seed again.
Yeah, they might miss the playoffs completely. Hot take. Western Conference surprise team. I don't know how much of a surprise it is, but I think I'm going to roll with the Pelicans.
I think that's a surprise as well.
I think they get into the playoffs there. I like what they've done. I think they could make up for the loss of Drew. Obviously, should just get the ball to Zion more in that sense. So, and then the Steven Adams signing, that'll be interesting.
I don't really like that for them, to be honest.
See, I think I don't not like it, but I don't necessarily love it.
He's a traditional big man. How could you love it?
Right.
I mean, he's like Derek Favors, but better, and that's what they had last year.
That's fair. Yeah. So anyways, that's my surprise team. Watch out for. I think they make the playoffs. The implosion team, I'm looking at, hate to say it, but it's the Rockets. They're not going to make the playoffs this year.
Yep.
They're not going to make the playoffs, especially within the next, I looked at my wrist and I don't even have my watch on today. They're going to deal Westbrook and Harden within the next 3 weeks, I think.
Yeah.
And
I don't know why you have to look at your watch to say that, but
at this point, it's not going to be a hot take, but
yeah. I'm not going to be very bold here. I'm going with your same teams in the East because I was going to say I think the Wizards slide into that 8th spot in the East because I just like Wall and Beal better than any 2 players on any of the other teams vying for that 8th spot. The Bulls, the Hawks, the Hornets. We know the Magic. We know the contenders. They have no one as good as Beal or Wall. I'll agree with you on the Pacers. I thought they were going to make moves this offseason. I thought they were going to get Gordon Hayward, which I would have loved for them. I'm concerned about Victor Oladipo's health and the way he's been playing. I don't see them being that high of a seed as well. I think they still make the playoffs, but certainly not a top 4 seed. In the West, I think the Suns will be my team that I'm really I mean, maybe the expectation is they take that 8th seed, but regardless, I'm picking them to take that 8th seed in the West. So I think they outperform expectations if people think they're going to miss the playoffs. And then maybe my little disappointing team would be the Grizzlies. I don't think they make that push for the 8th seed like they did last year in the same way. I just think that this is a young team and the West is so deep. I don't really see them making the playoffs this year. Now, we should mention, before I get to you, Seth, that this year there will be a play-in for the 7 to 10 seeds in a similar fashion to the play-in that the bubble had this year. So maybe we do get a surprise team in the 8th seed, even if they aren't seeded 8 as we go into the playoffs.
Good point.
Seth, what are your explosion implosion teams?
Yeah, I've been kind of flip-flopping. I'm with you on the Pacers being a disappointment this year. And I don't really see any team in the East really exceeding expectations. I think the 2 teams with the high ceiling are the Nets and the Sixers. But I kind of think it's going to even out and they'll be like 4 or 5 seeds. And then
I don't think we
potentially
talked about
boom
the Sixers enough
in
on
the
this.
playoffs. Yeah. And they could do more with trades and stuff, knowing Daryl as well. I'm going to take Phoenix as my boom team. And I think they're going to be higher than the 8th seed, to be honest. I mean, watching what Chris Paul did with OKC last year and how close Phoenix was and how Devin Booker is light years ahead of anyone else on the Thunder last year. So being a duo with Chris Paul, I have them slotted in as a 5 seed next year. And then, yeah, I think Houston's going to miss the playoffs. And that one's kind of obvious. So, yeah.
All right, let's finish this off, boys, by, as I tasked you with in the outline, seeding our playoffs for the West and the East, because like I said, most of the dominoes have fallen in free agency. We basically know what these teams are going to look like. The one huge caveat is the Harden potential trade. I will say that my rankings were done assuming Harden is traded away from the Rockets to the Eastern Conference. So I'll just go ahead and start with my West teams. I have the Lakers at 1. As we said, they got a little better. Clippers at 2. Still think they have the second best team. Nuggets at 3. Maybe got a little worse losing Jeremy Grant, but still a contender. I have the Portland at 4, which maybe is higher than some have. But like I said, I think they had a great offseason. And Damian Lillard, as we know, is one of the top players in the league. Got the Mavs at 5. Obviously, I love Luka, but Kristaps isn't even starting the season. So I think they slip a little bit. I don't think they get a top 4 seed. I put the Warriors at 6.
From 7 to 5.
They slipped from what people might have thought going into the season if Kristaps was healthy the whole season.
Interesting.
I thought a lot of people had them as a top 4 seed. So maybe they only slip one spot. Maybe they don't slip at all in your estimation. I don't know. But caution, slippery when wet. I have the Warriors at 6. I would have them as a top 4 seed, but Clay's gone. And now, maybe they missed the playoffs. I still think they have enough. But I have the Jazz at 7. Didn't really get better, but the Jazz always make the playoffs. So, and then I have the Suns at 8. Like I mentioned, I think they make the playoffs with CP3. I think, in my estimation, 1 through 7 are pretty strong. It's that 8 seed that is up for grabs for me. Seth, what do you think? Who do you have in the West?
I had all the same teams, but different order. So I've got Lakers, Denver, Clippers, top 3. And then I think Utah will have some of that institutional stability and be the 4 seed. And then I've got Phoenix jumping up to the 5 seed, like I just talked about, and Dallas, Golden State, and Portland.
Yeah, I think so. We both have basically the Suns and the Warriors replacing OKC and the Rockets from last year, because obviously losing Chris Paul and James Harden is huge for those teams. Kyle, what do you have?
Kind of stuck on the West just because I don't know what to do with Golden State now. Right now I have them sitting somewhere between the 8 and the 9. I just don't
between
know.
The 8 and the 9.
Yeah, so 8.5. So top down, obviously got the Lakers first. I have Denver as the second best team in the West. Portland as the 3 seed. Clippers as the 4 seed. Dallas as the 5th seed. Phoenix as the 6th, Utah at 7, and the Pelicans or Golden State as 8.
So we don't have a lot that different. Kyle, you had the Clippers lower than us, which I think could easily happen with the way that Kawhi and Paul rest themselves during the regular season, especially during a shortened season. So I think we're all basically on the same page there. It will be interesting, especially with that play-in, to see who grabs the 8th seed, right?
Yeah, right. And then for my Eastern Conference, right now, just because I really think that the Harden trade happens, I have Brooklyn as the 1 seed, Philadelphia as the 2 seed, Milwaukee as the 3, Boston not making, I'm just kidding, Boston as the 4, Miami 5, Toronto 6, Washington as the 7th seed, and Orlando as the 8th.
So you have Pacers missing it. That's your big zag.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, the Nets could certainly grab the 1 seed.
Defending Eastern Conference champions, your favorite Miami Heat at 5.
Also, he picked the Magic to beat. He always picks the Magic to beat the first round team every year, and now he's picking them to miss the playoffs.
I have Orlando. They're the 8th.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Just wait until they beat the Nets.
We'll just call it 3.
What are you gonna do when you're looking at James Harden versus the Magic first round?
Holy
oh my
shit.
God! All right, Seth, what's your East playoffs?
I've got the Bucks at number 1. I feel pretty confident about that. I think, they've been the top seed the last couple of years. They always play well in the regular season, regardless of what happens in the playoffs, and their team's better than last year. So
I'll bet money they're not the 1 seed.
I'll take that bet too. I have them at 1.
$10 each.
I'm not going to do that.
They could easily not get the 1 seed.
This goes back to
you
our
said you'll take that
McCaffrey thing. It's like, I think they have a better chance than anybody else to get the 1 seed, but that doesn't mean I would take them against the field. It's
Well,
like,
you did take him against the field and you lost because he got injured. So I won that bet.
yeah. And I made the same thing and I bet you out of principle because that was an outrageous argument, because just because someone else will probably finish first doesn't mean it's still not the best pick to take McCaffrey.
The logic may have been flawed, but I was right,
Bucks.
and that's what matters.
You were only right because of an injury, so I think the bet's off.
Yeah.
In the 2 spot, I've got the Celtics. I think we're going to be better than last year. Our 2 best players are only getting better, and Kemba will be more comfortable, and we won't be continuously, I mean, obviously assuming we're all healthy, we won't be continuously like having Hayward coming in and out of the lineup. I've got Miami at 3 because I don't know why Kyle hates Bam Adebayo, but I believe in him. I've got Philly, and then Brooklyn, and then Toronto. Pacers sneaking into the 7 seed. And despite just disparaging them, I think the Hawks will get the 8th seed.
I have something pretty similar. I have Bucks 1, Celtics 2, Raptors 3, Nets 4. This is just without knowing. If Harden joined the Nets, maybe they get a higher seed. Heat 5, Sixers 6. Again, if Harden joins the Sixers, I would probably bump them up. Pacers in 7, and then the Wizards, as we discussed, in 8th. I feel like in the East more than the West, to me, the 1 through 7, I feel really confident in, barring injury, that those 7 teams are going to make the playoffs in some order. And then it's really up to the 8th seed.
Okay. I'm confused why both of you have the Heat so low after they just went to the finals.
Well, the Nets, of course, are adding Durant, the best player in the league, so that's got to be considered.
And James Harden. Philadelphia got better.
The Heat themselves finished 5th last year, so I have them in the same spot. They didn't make any changes, so,
They actually lost some players.
Yeah.
They haven't re-signed Kelly. They lost Jay.
I mean, those top teams in the East, I could see in any order, really. I'm not like, wow, no way the Heat finish in the top 3. I mean, that could easily happen, of course. All right, well, this has been our NBA offseason pod.
Wait. Are we making – it wasn't in the show sheet, but predictions, final predictions?
Well, if it wasn't the show sheet, then we're not doing it, are we, Kyle?
We never go by the show sheet.
I'm kidding.
Really
fine, go ahead. What's your prediction?
We have the Lakers.
Ugh, get off. Stop. I'm not even allowing you to pick the Lakers.
The Lakers and the Sixers.
That's exactly what you picked last year.
At some point,
it didn't work.
Happen. The Sixers have Daryl Morey now. They got rid of.
He can't dribble a basketball, so I don't know.
They got rid of Horford. Get his ass out. He sucked anyways. And they improved their bench shooting. So, yeah, I'm going to take them, and I'm going to take the Lakers to run it back because, as we all know, they're going to win the next 2 years. LeBron's going to get his 6th ring going.
Stop.
6th ring going with the 3-peat. It's going to happen. We're going to have movies. There's going to be books written, and I'm going to author one of them.
Okay, well, you picked the Lakers to be in the championship last year and then disparaged them the whole year. So I'm not hearing that again from you this year. No disparaging. No, they're going to lose to Portland.
How do you think I'm going to disparage them?
You picked them to lose in the first round of the Portland Trailblazers.
And the second round and the third round.
So I did that because we were playing a pool where I knew everyone else was picking the Lakers.
No.
And at that point,
it
made sense.
No, I came out of the wilderness with 75 texts from you saying, this is the worst team I've ever seen LeBron have. No way they beat Portland. None of their players can play.
That's fine. They have Dennis Schroeder now.
I was hot for a minute. Okay.
I don't know. What more do they need? They have the best player in the league on their team coming off the bench.
Seth, you came on this podcast last time and declared Celtics Warriors as the finals. With Clay being injured, I assume that you're going to have to pick another Western Conference team for that declaration.
Yeah, makes me sad.
He's going to pick the Lakers.
I would never pick the Lakers under any circumstances.
It must be the Nuggets.
Although it would be satisfying to beat them in the finals. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Clippers.
What, you're just guessing now? This is a podcast. Aren't you supposed to have an educated guess?
It wasn't in the show notes, which I don't read anyways.
All right, fine. We'll pencil you in for Clippers, but you weren't resolute about it. Okay, how about that?
Tune in next time. for what Seth's finals prediction will be, which I don't even know why we're doing finals predictions like a month before the season starts. But
Because
That's
it's
why I
fun,
wasn't in the
Seth.
show notes. I would never do that.
It's fun.
I'll tentatively.
We just went through and ranked the entire Eastern and Western Conference playoffs, but we can't make the pick of who's going to make the finals.
I'm going to tentatively say Lakers Celtics, but I'm not bound to it, even though I said it on the podcast. All right, we really got to go. So this has been a pleasure, boys. Any final thoughts to our listeners?
Lakers three-peat. On the third year, they won again.
They might lose to the Portland Trailblazers first, though.
Portland would have to be the 8th seed, which definitely isn't happening. They have Bobby.
Seth, I assume you stopped the recording because I had to pee.
I'm leaving that in.